The story, A Journey to Forgiveness, was brought to you by Tales by Aduni. Thanks for watching. In a small town, nestled between rolling hills and the echo of broken dreams, lived a boy named Kelechi. His story was not one of privilege or ease, but of struggle, resilience, and an unwavering bond with his mother, Chioma, who was determined to give him a future brighter than the shadows they lived under. Kelechi's earliest memories were of the tiny one-room apartment where he and his mother lived. The walls were thin, barely holding out the cold, and the roof leaked whenever it rained. His father, Emeka, was a man whose soul had been drowned in alcohol long before Kelechi was born. Emeka was absent even when present, his mind lost in the bottle, leaving Chioma to shoulder the weight of the world alone. Chioma worked tirelessly to provide for her son, juggling 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. She was a cleaner at a local school in the mornings, a cashier at a grocery store in the afternoons, and a waitress at a diner by night. Sleep was a luxury she could rarely afford, and the exhaustion showed in the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands trembled as she counted out change at the end of a long day. There were nights when they had no food, and Chioma would go hungry just to ensure Kelechi had something to eat. The rent was often late, and the landlord's threats became a familiar soundtrack to their lives. But Chioma never complained, never let Kelechi see the despair that sometimes threatened to consume her. Instead, she told him stories of better days to come, weaving dreams of a future where they would no longer have to struggle. Chapter 2: The Brink of Despair. But the weight of the world proved too much for even the strongest shoulders. One bleak winter, Chioma lost her job at the diner. The bills piled up, and they were eventually evicted from their home. With nowhere to go, Chioma and Kelechi found themselves at the mercy of the streets. They spent nights huddled together in makeshift shelters, using newspapers as blankets and huddling close to stay warm. Chioma continued to work her remaining jobs, leaving Kelechi at a nearby library during the day, where he would do his homework and dream of a better life. But as the weeks turned into months, the reality of their situation began to weigh heavily on the young boy. They eventually found a spot in a homeless shelter, where the conditions were barely better than the streets. The shelter was overcrowded, and the air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and despair. Chioma tried to shield Kelechi from the harsh realities of their situation, but there was no hiding the pain in her eyes as she struggled to make ends meet. Chapter 3: A Ray of Hope. After nearly a year in the shelter, just when hope seemed like a distant memory, Chioma's prayers were answered. She found a steady job as a caregiver for an elderly woman in the town's wealthier district. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to secure a small apartment for them. Moving into their new home felt like a miracle. The apartment was modest, with worn carpets and peeling paint, but to Kelechi and Chioma, it was a palace. For the first time in a long while, they had a place to call their own, a place where they could begin to rebuild their lives. Chioma continued to work hard, but with a more stable income, she was able to cut down to 2 jobs. This gave her more time with Kelechi, who was now excelling in school. Despite the hardships they faced, Chioma had managed to instill in her son the importance of education, and he clung to his studies as if they were a lifeline. Chapter 4: Rising from the Ashes. Kelechi's hard work paid off. Against all odds, he earned a scholarship to a prestigious medical school. Chioma cried tears of joy the day he received his acceptance letter, her heart swelling with pride at the thought that her son was on his way to achieving the dreams she had always held for him. Medical school was challenging, but Kelechi was driven by the memories of his mother's sacrifices. He studied late into the night, fueled by the desire to give her the life she deserved. The years flew by, and soon Kelechi was a doctor, a title that carried the weight of every struggle, every sleepless night, and every tear his mother had shed. Chapter 5: The final test life had taken Kelechi far from the town of his childhood, but it also brought him full circle. One day, he received a call from the local hospital, informing him that his father, Emeka, was gravely ill. The man who had abandoned them, who had left his mother to carry the burden alone, was now on his deathbed. Kelechi's initial reaction was anger. Emeka had been nothing but a source of pain and disappointment. But as he looked at his mother, who still carried a quiet grace despite all she had endured, he knew what he had to do. Kelechi traveled back to his hometown, entering the hospital room where his father lay. Emeka was a shadow of the man he once was, his body ravaged by years of alcoholism. He was barely conscious, but when he saw Kelechi, a flicker of recognition passed over his face. Kelechi could see the fear in his father's eyes, the regret that came too late. But instead of anger, Kelechi felt a deep sadness. This man, who had missed every important moment in his life, was now at his mercy. And despite everything, Kelechi knew he couldn't let him die alone, filled with regret. Kelechi did everything in his power to save his father. He used every ounce of his medical knowledge, every resource at his disposal, but in the end, Emeka's body was too far gone. He passed away with Kelechi by his side, holding his hand and whispering words of forgiveness. Epilogue: The Power of Forgiveness. Kelechi buried his father in the small cemetery on the outskirts of town, next to the mother he had never truly known. As he stood by the graveside, Chioma by his side, he realized that forgiveness had not been for his father's sake, but for his own. By letting go of the anger and pain, he had freed himself from the shadows of the past. Kelechi went on to become a renowned doctor, dedicating his life to helping those who could not help themselves, just as his mother had once done for him. And though the scars of his childhood would always be with him, they were a reminder of the strength and resilience that had brought him through. In the end, it was not the absence of his father that defined him, but the presence of his mother, who had loved him enough for two. Through her, Kelechi had learned the true meaning of sacrifice, perseverance, and most importantly, forgiveness. We hope you enjoyed listening to A Journey to Forgiveness, brought to you by Tales by Aduni. Please give this video a thumbs up and kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel, Tales by Aduni. See you next time.